They emptied the account meant for my future and handed it to my brother for a party. He needs a good start, they said, shrugging. What they didn't know was that I'd spent 2 years learning exactly how to take it all back. The teller had one of those smiles that stayed the same no matter what the screen in front of her said. That was the first thing I noticed. She smiled at me when I slid my ID across the counter, and she was still smiling when the color drained out of her face, and somehow that steady, professional smile was worse than if she'd frowned. "I'm sorry," she said. "Can you give me just one moment?" It was a Tuesday. I remember that clearly because I'd taken my lunch break early specifically, so I could walk the 4 blocks from the law firm to the bank, withdraw the tuition payment for my fall semester, and walk back before anyone noticed I'd been gone longer than 45 minutes. I had the deadline circled on the calendar taped above my desk. Fall enrollment closed Friday. I'd been counting down to this day the way other people count down to vacations. For 2 years, I had been taking night classes 1 or 2 at a time, paying out of pocket, because when I turned 22, my parents had told me the fund would be released to me properly. Once I hit a certain milestone, and I'd believed them, the way you believe your own parents when they use words like properly and released and your future. I'd been patient. I'd been good. And now I was finally going to enroll full-time and finish the degree I'd been chipping away at for years, and it would all be paid for by the account my grandmother had started for me before I was even born. The teller came back. Behind her walked a man in a gray suit with a lanyard, and I knew before he opened his mouth that men in gray suits with lanyards do not walk out onto the floor to deliver good news. "Miss," he said gently, "are you the sole account holder, or is this a joint account?" "It's mine," I said. "Well, my name's on it. My father's a signer, I think. It was set up when I was a baby." He nodded slowly, like I'd confirmed something he'd been afraid of. "I see. So the account has a balance of $11.40. There was a series of withdrawals over the past several months. The most recent one closed it out almost entirely about 6 weeks ago. I heard the words. I understood each one individually. It was the way they fit together that I couldn't make sense of. "That's not possible," I said. There's almost $60,000 in that account." "There was," he said, and he had the decency to look uncomfortable. "The withdrawals were authorized by a signer on the account. Everything appears to have been done through the proper channels." "Which signer?" He glanced at the screen, then at me, and I watched him decide whether he was allowed to tell me. "The other name on the account, Gerald." "My father. I don't fully remember walking back to work." I know I didn't finish my sandwich. I know I sat down at my desk and stared at the calendar with the Friday deadline circled in red marker, and I remember thinking, with a strange, floating calm, that I should call my mother, because surely there was an explanation, surely there was a version of this that made sense. She picked up on the 3rd ring, and I could hear laughter behind her, and dishes clinking, and my brother's voice. "Emily. Perfect timing, we're just going over the seating chart. You'll never guess how many people RSVP'd for the reception." "Mom," I said, "the bank called me down to a manager. My college account is empty, there's $11 in it." The line went quiet. Not silent, I could still hear the party sounds, but her end went quiet, and in that quiet I understood that she already knew, that she'd known before I did. That the surprise on her end wasn't what happened, but that I'd found out. "Oh, honey," she said finally, and her voice had shifted into something careful and rehearsed. "We were going to sit down and talk to you about that." "Talk to me about what?" "About Nathan and Sabrina. The wedding it got bigger than we planned. The venue, the catering, Sabrina had her heart set on the vineyard, and you know how these things add up. Your father and I discussed it, and we decided the family would come together to give them a proper start. You spent my college fund on a wedding." "It's not like that," she said quickly. "It's family money, Emily. It always has been, and Nathan needs a good start. He's building a life. You sweetheart, you're doing so well on your own, you always have. You're the strong one. You'll figure it out, you always figure it out." I hung up before she finished the sentence. Not out of anger, exactly. I hung up because I had just realized something that reorganized 24 years of my life in a single second. My whole childhood, every time I'd been told I was the strong one, the independent one, the one who didn't need help, it hadn't been a compliment. It had been a permission slip. They'd been telling themselves a story so that one day, when they needed to, they could take everything I had and feel good about it. I sat there with the phone still warm in my hand, and I understood that in my family, being strong had never been a gift I was given. It was a bill they'd been quietly running up, and now, at last, they'd come to collect. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my studio apartment, 400 square feet, a bed that folded into the wall, a hot plate instead of a stove, the whole thing chosen because it was cheap and close to work, and I stared at the ceiling, and I did the thing I always do when I can't sleep. I thought about the box. My grandmother's box. It was a small thing, maybe the size of a loaf of bread, carved out of dark walnut with a lid that fit so precisely you had to nudge it just so to open it. She'd carved the flowers on the lid herself. She'd done woodwork her whole life, my grandmother, sawdust always in the creases of her hands. When I was 7, she sat me down at her kitchen table and showed me a slim little bank passbook inside that box, and a folded piece of paper in her spidery handwriting that said, "For Emily's future." "This is yours," she told me. "Nobody else's. I started it the month you were born, and I'm going to keep filling it, and when you're grown, this is going to open a door for you that was closed for me. You understand? Some doors you don't get a second chance at." She died when I was 19. My father took the box for safekeeping. I'd asked about it twice over the years, and both times he'd waved me off. "It's in the safe, don't worry about it, it's all being handled." And like an idiot, I'd let it go, because he was my father and the box was in the safe, and I trusted the safe more than I trusted my own instincts. Lying there in the dark, I kept coming back to that box. Not the money, the box. The passbook, the paper in her handwriting. Because here was the thing that wouldn't leave me alone. If they'd drained the account, what had they done with the box? You can empty an account with a signature and a computer, but the box was a physical thing. It existed somewhere. And whoever held it held the one piece of proof that this money had never, ever been family money. It had a name on it. It had my name on it, in ink, in my grandmother's own hand. I didn't have a plan yet. I just had that thought circling and circling, and it kept me company through the worst night of my life. The next morning, I called my father directly. I wanted to hear him say it. "Emily," he said, and there wasn't a trace of shame in it. "Your mother told me you called upset. I understand you're disappointed, but I'm going to need you to be an adult about this." Be an adult, from the man who'd taken $60,000 that wasn't his. "Dad, that money was for my degree. Grandma set it up for me. It has my name on it." "It had my name on it too," he said, "which means it was a family decision, and the family decided. Your brother is getting married. That's a once-in-a-lifetime thing, Emily. Your education, you can do that anytime. You're already doing it. Look how far you've gotten on your own." There it was again, on your own, like it was a virtue instead of the exact thing they'd forced on me so they could rob me clean. "And Grandma's box?" I asked. "The passbook, the note she wrote." There was the smallest pause, half a second, but I'd spent 2 years at a law firm learning to listen for exactly that, the half second before a careful answer. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. "That old thing, I have no idea where that ended up. Probably got thrown out when we cleaned the house." He was lying. I knew he was lying the way you know a sound is coming from a different room than the one you're looking at. My father is not a good liar. He never had to be. He'd always had my mother to smooth things over and me to just accept whatever I was told. "Okay, Dad," I said. "Thanks for explaining." "So we're good," he said, relieved, already moving on. "Your mother wants you at the rehearsal dinner Saturday. Sabrina's got you on the list. Nathan's counting on you being there for him." "I'll think about it," I said, and hung up. I sat on the edge of my folded-out bed with the phone in my lap, and I thought about the box one more time. And this time, the thought that circled wasn't grief. It was something colder and clearer. He knows exactly where it is, and he's afraid of it. You don't lie about a thing you don't care about. You lie about a thing that can hurt you. the box wasn't just a memory anymore. It had become the loose thread. And I worked at a firm full of people who pulled loose threads for a living. To understand how much this betrayal cost me, you'd have to understand how much I'd already given. I was the one who got the after-school job at 15 so I could buy my own school clothes, because Nathan's growing so fast, we can't keep up with him. I was the one who gave up the summer band trip so the money could go toward Nathan's car when he turned 17, because he needs to be able to get to work. Emily, be reasonable. I was the one who moved out at 18 with 2 suitcases and a folding chair, who never once asked them for rent money, who sent my mother flowers every birthday even during the years when money was so tight I skipped meals to afford the delivery fee. And Nathan got the car. Nathan got the college that Mom and Dad actually paid for. Nathan got to live at home rent-free until he was 25. Nathan got the down payment on his condo as a loan that everyone understood would never be repaid. Every door that closed for me swung wide open for him, and I told myself it was fine because I was the strong one, because I was the one who didn't need it. I loved my brother. That's the part that still catches in my throat. Nathan was never cruel to me. He was just comfortable. Comfortable being the favorite, comfortable taking, comfortable never once asking whether the thing he was handed had been taken from somewhere else. When we were kids, he'd share his candy with me without being told. Somewhere along the way, the world taught him that everything good simply flowed toward him, and he stopped asking where it came from. And then, 18 months ago, Sabrina arrived. I met her at a family barbecue, and my first impression was that she was the most poised person I'd ever seen in a backyard. Everyone else was in shorts. She was in a linen dress that looked expensive and effortless. She remembered my name instantly, complimented my grandmother's ring on my finger, the woodworker, right? Nathan told me all about her. What a legacy. And within 20 minutes, she had my mother laughing like a schoolgirl and my father showing her his fishing photos. An event and lifestyle consultant is how she described her job when I asked. I asked what that meant. She smiled and said, I help families plan the moments that matter most. Which is not an answer, which is a sentence shaped like an answer. At the time I thought I was being unfair. She was polished, sure, but polish isn't a crime. My parents adored her. Nathan was smitten. And I was the perpetually broke sister squinting at the pretty fiancée, so I told myself the wariness in my gut was just plain old envy, and I swallowed it. But little things kept snagging, the way a rough spot on a table snags a sleeve. She said she'd grown up in Oregon, then a month later mentioned back home in Arizona, so smoothly I thought I'd misheard. She talked about a degree in hospitality management from a university that, when I looked it up out of idle curiosity, didn't offer that degree. She had photos on her social media that were all from the last 2 years, beautiful, curated, sparse, as though she'd sprung into existence fully formed at 24 with no messy past attached. When I mentioned once that I worked at a law firm, something flickered behind her eyes, quick as a fish under ice, before the warm smile slid back into place. And there was the day I overheard her in the kitchen with my mother, not knowing I'd come back inside for my forgotten jacket. The sensible thing, really, Sabrina was saying, her voice lower and smoother than her party voice. Emily's so independent, she'd be the first to say the family should invest where it'll grow. Nathan's the one building the future. It just makes sense, Diane. And honestly, tying it up in tuition when she's already managing so beautifully on her own, that's not investing, that's just sentimentality. That's exactly what Gerald said, my mother murmured. He's a smart man, Sabrina said warmly. I stood in the hallway with my jacket half on and I felt the floor tilt under me, because I understood in that moment that the idea to take my fund hadn't sprung out of nowhere. It had been planted, watered, grown, and the gardener was standing in my mother's kitchen calling it sense. I didn't confront her. I didn't say a word. I picked up my jacket, walked out to my car, and sat there gripping the wheel until my knuckles ached. Because I'd just learned something that changed the whole shape of the thing. This wasn't my parents making a bad, selfish decision on their own. This was a woman who called herself a consultant, whose past didn't add up, who had studied my family like a blueprint and found the one account with the most money and the least resistance, and steered them straight into it. And she'd made one mistake. She'd looked at me, the broke sister, the pushover, the one who always folds, and she'd decided I was the least resistance of all. For 3 days after the bank, I did nothing. I want to be honest about that. I went to work, I came home, I ate crackers over the sink and stared at the wall, and I let myself feel like the person my family had always cast me as, the one who absorbs, who adjusts, who figures it out quietly and never makes a fuss. And then on the 4th day, something in me simply turned over, the way an engine catches after you've almost given up on it. I was at my desk at the firm, filing a batch of documents for a probate case, and I was reading through a dispute about a trust, an elderly man's children fighting over who'd had authority to move money from an account, who was named, who was a signer versus a beneficiary versus an owner. Standard stuff. I'd read 100 files like it. But this time I was reading it about me. I set the folder down and I thought, very clearly, I do this for a living now. I spend 40 hours a week around people who trace money, who read account histories, who know the exact difference between family money and money with one person's name on it and a paper trail proving intent. I'd been so busy being the victim that I'd forgotten I'd spent 2 years accidentally training to be something else entirely. So I started, quietly, the way I do everything. That night, I pulled up the online bank portal. My name was still on the account, which meant I still had access to the statements even if the money was gone. I downloaded every statement going back 3 years, and I read them the way I'd been taught to read a financial record at work, not for the big numbers, but for the pattern. And the pattern told a story. The withdrawals hadn't started 6 weeks ago. They'd started 9 months ago, right around the time Nathan and Sabrina got engaged. Small ones at first. 2,000 here, 3,500 there. A deposit to a venue. A payment to a company called something bland and corporate. Then bigger ones. Then, 6 weeks ago, the account had been swept nearly to zero in a single transfer. But here's what made me sit up straight in my folding chair. Several of those payments hadn't gone to the vineyard or the caterer or the florist. Several of them, 4, totaling almost $19,000, had gone to that bland corporate name. And when I looked it up, it was a limited liability company, an LLC. Registered, according to the public business filings I could pull the very next morning at work, to a single member. Sabrina. $19,000 of my grandmother's money hadn't gone to my brother's wedding at all. It had gone into a company owned by his fiancée. I printed it. I didn't say anything. I just printed it and slid it into a folder, and I felt, for the first time in 4 days, something other than grief. I felt the cold, clean focus I got at work when a messy case suddenly clicked into a shape. That afternoon, I did something I'd been circling for days. I knocked on Marcus's door. Marcus was the supervising attorney I worked under, 49, silver at the temples, the kind of estate lawyer who'd seen every ugly thing families do to each other over money and had stopped being shocked by any of it decades ago. He was also, under the dry courtroom manner, one of the most decent people I'd ever met. He'd hired me when I was a 22-year-old with no experience and a lot of nerve, and he'd never once made me feel small. "Emily," he said, taking off his reading glasses, "you look like a woman who's about to ask me a hypothetical." I laughed despite everything. Is it that obvious? It's always a hypothetical when someone knocks like that. Sit down. So I told him, not as an employee to a boss, as a person who'd been robbed to someone who understood the machinery of robbery. I told him about the account, about my grandmother, about the note in her handwriting, about the box my father claimed he'd thrown away, and I knew he hadn't. I told him about the $19,000 that had vanished into an LLC belonging to my brother's bride. Marcus listened without interrupting, which is a rare and valuable thing. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "A few things," he said finally, holding up a finger. 1. If that account was established by your grandmother with you as the intended beneficiary, and there's documentation of that intent, that passbook, that note, then your father being a signer does not make it his money to spend. A signer has authority to transact, not to own. If he moved that money for his own purposes or for your brother's against the documented purpose of the account, that's not a family disagreement. Depending on how the account was titled, that could be conversion. Possibly financial exploitation. Possibly, if the paperwork is what you think it is, something a prosecutor would find interesting. I felt my heartbeat in my ears. 2, he went on. That box you keep mentioning, you need it. The account statements prove the money moved. The note in your grandmother's hand proves who it was for. One without the other is an argument. Both together is a case. And 3, I said because he'd held up 3 fingers. 3. He leaned back. This consultant, this LLC. If $19,000 of a young woman's education money found its way into a company owned by the person who talked the family into taking it, Emily, that's not a coincidence, and it may not be the first time. People who do this don't do it once. Find out who she was before your family. That's where the real story usually is. I sat there and I felt the last of the passive, absorbing, figure-it-out-quietly girl fall away. Marcus, I said, will you help me? He put his glasses back on. I was going to be insulted if you didn't ask. The rehearsal dinner was that Saturday. I went. I almost didn't. But Marcus had said something that stuck with me. Don't tip your hand. Let them keep thinking you're the one who folds. It's the most valuable thing you have right now. So I put on my one good dress and I drove out to the restaurant my brother had booked, a private room with string lights and 40 covers, paid for, I now knew, with my future, and I walked in with a smile and a wrapped gift, and I played my part. My mother hugged me and whispered, I'm so glad you came around, sweetheart, I knew you would. As though I'd finally been reasonable. As though the theft had been a test of my maturity and I'd passed. Sabrina found me by the drinks table. She looked flawless, of course, the bride-to-be, radiant, gracious. She took both my hands in hers. Emily, she said warmly, I'm so happy you're here. I know things have been tense, and I want you to know, whatever you've heard, I'm on your side. Family shouldn't fight over money. It's just things, isn't it? It's just things. 19,000 of my grandmother's dollars in her private company, and she looked me in the eye and called it things. You're so right, I said, and I let her see exactly the face she wanted to see, the soft, defeated sister making peace. It's just things. Life's too short. Something in her shoulders relaxed. She'd read me as folding again, and it confirmed everything she believed about me. Good. Let her believe it. I could have stayed quiet all night. That was the plan. But then, over dessert, my father tapped his glass and stood and gave a little speech about family, about how proud he was of Nathan, about how, when one of us succeeds, we all succeed because that's what family money is for. And he looked right at me when he said family money, with a little smile, daring me to flinch. And I decided right then to plant a single seed. Not the whole harvest. Just one seed to see what grew. When the speeches ended and people were mingling, I found Nathan by himself for a moment near the window. My brother. My smitten, comfortable, willfully blind brother. It's a beautiful party, I said. The vineyard, the catering, all of it must have cost a fortune. Sabrina's got a gift for this stuff, he said, glowing. She got us deals you wouldn't believe. Vendor connections. She used to work in the industry. She knows everybody. That's lucky, I said. Hey, random question. That company Mom and Dad paid for some of the wedding through, the LLC, is that Sabrina's? I only ask because I saw the name on a card somewhere and it looked so professional. His face did something interesting. It went, for just a second, blank. What company? The one $19,000 went to, I said pleasantly. From my college account. I've got the statements. I just assumed you both knew, since it's her company. I watched it land. I watched my brother, who genuinely, I believe, thought the money for his wedding had simply come from his generous parents' savings, realize for the first time that a chunk of it had gone straight into his fiancée's private business, from my stolen account. That's, I'm sure there's an explanation, he said, but his voice had lost its glow. She handles all the vendor payments. That's probably just how she. Probably, I agreed, smiling. I'm sure you're right. "Congratulations again, Nathan, I mean it." And I walked away. I didn't need to do more than that. I know my brother. He wasn't going to storm over and demand answers in the middle of his own rehearsal dinner. But I'd put a splinter under his skin, and splinters have a way of working themselves deeper. I was almost to the door when Sabrina caught my arm. Her grip was harder than it had any right to be. Her smile was still on, but her eyes had gone flat and cold, and for the first time I saw the person underneath the linen dress. "What did you say to Nathan?" she said, not a question. "I congratulated him," I said. "Emily." She lowered her voice and every trace of warmth was gone. "You're a smart girl. You've had a hard road and I respect that, I do. But you don't want to make an enemy of me. I've dealt with people like you before and it never goes the way they think it's going to. So do yourself a favor. Take the loss, go home, and be the strong, independent girl everyone says you are." There it was, the strong, independent girl. The same phrase my family had used to rob me my whole life, now in the mouth of the woman who'd engineered the final theft. It should have made me flinch. Instead, it made me cert. "You know what's funny?" I said, gently pulling my arm free. "Everybody keeps telling me how independent I am, how I always figure things out on my own." I looked her right in the eyes. "You should probably wonder what someone like that figures out when she finally decides to." The flat coldness in her eyes cracked, just slightly, into something I recognized. Fear. She'd dealt with people like me before, she'd said, but she'd never dealt with me. I drove home and I called Marcus and I said, "She threatened me." And she confirmed the LLC is hers, right in front of my brother. He didn't know. "Good," Marcus said. "She's rattled. Rattled people make mistakes." Now about that box, and about her past, I made a couple of calls. Sabrina's mistake, it turned out, was assuming that a woman who'd never fought back didn't know how to. Over the next 2 weeks, 3 things happened. The first was the box. It came to me from the least likely direction, my Aunt Carol, my father's younger sister, who called me out of the blue one evening. She'd heard, through the family grapevine, that Emily was making trouble about her college money, and she'd called, she said, to tell me she was on my side. "Your grandmother would be spinning," Carol said. She made me promise Emily, before she passed. She said, "Carol, that box is for Emily, and if the money ever goes missing, you make sure the box doesn't." I didn't understand it at the time. I thought she was being dramatic. But after she died, when your father was cleaning out her house, I took it. I've had it in my closet for 5 years. I didn't want to start a fight, but if there's a fight now anyway. I closed my eyes. My grandmother, with sawdust in the creases of her hands, had seen this coming 5 years before it happened. Some doors you don't get a second chance at. She'd known exactly who her son was. She'd hidden the door key with the one person she trusted to keep it. Carol drove it over that night. I lifted the walnut lid with hands that wouldn't quite stay steady, and there it was, the slim passbook, and the folded paper, softened with age, in that spidery handwriting. For Emily's future. And beneath it, something I'd never seen because I'd only ever looked once as a child. A second sheet, a formal one, where my grandmother had written out, dated and signed, that this account was established solely for my education, that Gerald was named as signer only to manage it on my behalf until I came of age, and that the funds were never to be used for any other purpose or person. She'd made a record. My grandmother, the woodworker, had built the case herself and left it in a box for me to find. The second thing was Sabrina's past. Marcus's couple of calls had been to a colleague 2 states over, and public records did the rest. Sabrina had not grown up in Oregon or Arizona. She'd grown up under a slightly different version of her name in a 3rd state entirely, and 3 years before she met my brother, she'd been engaged to a man there, a widower with a comfortable retirement account and an adult daughter. During that engagement, $41,000 had moved out of the widower's savings and into an LLC. A different LLC, same structure, same single member. The engagement ended when the daughter, suspicious, hired someone to look. There'd been no charges, the widower, humiliated, hadn't wanted to press them, and Sabrina had vanished before he changed his mind. But the daughter had written about it, at length, in a small consumer protection forum, warning others, naming the pattern if not the current name. I read that daughter's post 4 times. She described a woman who was poised, warm, remembered everyone's name, called herself a lifestyle consultant, and steered every family conversation toward money like water finding a drain. I found her. Her name was Rachel. I sent her a careful message, and she called me within the hour, and when I described Sabrina, there was a long silence, and then Rachel said in a shaking voice, "She's doing it again. Oh my God, she's doing it again." The third thing was Nathan. The splinter I'd put under his skin had done its work. He called me on a Wednesday, and his easy, comfortable voice was gone. "I looked into the LLC," he said quietly. "You were right, 19,000. And there's more, she's been putting our vendor deposits through it too, and some of the numbers don't add up. Emily, I asked her about it and she got so angry. She said I didn't trust her," she cried. She said her ex-fiancé's family had turned on her the same way and she couldn't believe I'd do it too. He paused. "But you never told me about any ex-fiancé." And when I asked her about him, she said there wasn't one. I sat very still. "Nathan, there was one. His name doesn't matter, but his daughter's name is Rachel. And I think you and I need to sit down, not at Mom and Dad's, somewhere official. I want you to hear all of it with someone in the room who knows the law. Will you come?" There was a long breath on the line, the sound of my brother's whole comfortable world tilting on its axis. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I'll come." I hung up and looked at the walnut box open on my folding table, the passbook and my grandmother's signed record laid out beside the bank statements, beside the business filings, beside the printout of Rachel's post. An argument, Marcus had said, is one piece. A case is both. I had all of it now. I didn't stage a scene at a wedding. I didn't stand up at a dinner and point across a crowded room. That's not who I am, and honestly, it would have let them off easy. A public blow-up can be dismissed as hysterics, as jealousy, as the bitter sister making a spectacle. What can't be dismissed is a conference room, a stack of documents, and a lawyer. So I invited them to Marcus's office. I framed it carefully as a chance to clear the air before the wedding, and I addressed the invitation to all 4 of them. My father, my mother, Nathan, and Sabrina. They came because Sabrina made them. I understood that afterward. She couldn't afford not to know what I was going to say, so she told my parents it would look bad to refuse, that they should show up and put the whole silly thing to rest. She walked in first, in a cream blazer, radiant with the confidence of a woman who'd won this game before. My parents trailed behind her, my father already wearing his "let's be adults about this" face. Nathan came last, and he wouldn't meet Sabrina's eyes. Marcus sat at the head of the table. I sat to his right. On the table in front of me was the walnut box, closed. "Thank you all for coming," Marcus said, in the mild, unhurried voice I'd heard him use to take apart far more sophisticated people than the ones in this room. "Emily asked me to sit in. I'm an estate attorney. I want to keep this calm and factual. Nobody's shouting today. We're just going to look at some documents." "With respect," my father said, "this is a family matter. I don't know why we need a lawyer for a family matter." "You'll see in a moment why the distinction matters," Marcus said pleasantly. I opened the box. I laid it out the way I'd laid out 100 case files, in order, one piece at a time, narrating in the flat, steady voice I use at work, because I'd learned that calm is far more devastating than fury. "This account," I said, sliding the passbook across the table, "was opened by Grandma the month I was born. This note is in her handwriting. It says, 'For Emily's future.'" I placed it down. This second document, which I'd never seen until 2 weeks ago, is also in her handwriting, dated and signed. It states that the account was established solely for my education. That Dad was named as a signer only to manage it on my behalf until I came of age. And that the funds were, and I'm quoting her, "never to be used for any other purpose or person." The room had gone very quiet. "Marcus," I said, "can you explain what a signer is versus an owner?" "A signer," Marcus said, "has authority to transact on an account. It does not make them the owner of the funds. When funds are established for a specific beneficiary with documented intent, a signer who diverts those funds for a different purpose isn't making a family decision. Depending on the titling, and I've reviewed this account's titling, he may be committing conversion, possibly financial exploitation. It's the kind of thing that, brought to the right office, gets a case number. My father's adult face was gone. Now hold on. These, I continued, sliding the next stack across, are the account statements. They show the withdrawals started 9 months ago, not 6 weeks ago, right after the engagement. I laid down the next sheet. And these 4 payments, $19,100, didn't go to the vineyard or the caterer. They went here. I set down the business filing, an LLC, sole member, Sabrina. Nathan's head came up. My mother turned to Sabrina. That's Sabrina, that's not right, is it? That's just how you handle the vendors. But I was already sliding the last 2 documents onto the table. This, I said, is a public record from another state from 3 years ago, and this is a post written by a woman named Rachel, whose father, a widower, was engaged to a woman who called herself a lifestyle consultant. Poised, warm, remembered everyone's name, steered every family conversation toward money. I looked up. $41,000 of his savings went into an LLC. Same structure. Same single member. Different name, but the same woman. I let it sit for 1 second. Rachel is willing to speak. She's on a call right now, if anyone would like to say hello. I turned my phone face up on the table. The call was already connected. Sabrina. Rachel's voice came through, thin and clear in the silent room. I recognize the description. I recognize all of it. You did it to my dad. You broke him. And I have been waiting 3 years to be able to warn the next family before it was too late. Sabrina stood up so fast her chair scraped. For one moment the mask was completely gone, the coldness I'd seen at the rehearsal dinner, but whiter now, cornered. This is defamation, she said. Every one of you, this is a jealous, broke girl who couldn't stand to see me happy, and you're all going to sit here and... Sabrina, it was Nathan. I'd never heard my brother's voice sound like that. Quiet, final. You told me there was no ex-fiancé, he said. You cried and told me your ex's family turned on you like Emily was turning on us, but you said there was no ex. Both can't be true. He stood, and he looked at the woman he'd been about to marry the way you look at a stranger who's been wearing a friend's face. I saw the vendor numbers myself. You've been running our money, Emily's money, through your company, and you looked me in the eye every single day. Nathan, baby. No, he said. No, I don't. I need you to leave. She looked around the room for an ally. My mother was staring at the LLC document like it might rearrange itself into something innocent. My father had his head in his hands. There was no one. There was no one left to charm. Sabrina picked up her purse, and at the door she turned, and the last thing she said was to me, low, so only I really caught it. You should have just taken the loss. I know, I said. That's what everyone always expected me to do. And she was gone. It didn't all resolve in that room. Real life rarely offers you a clean curtain, but it resolved. Rachel's warning post, once she updated it with the new name and the new state, carefully, factually, everything documented did what warnings do. 2 other families reached out to her within a month, each with the same story: the poise, the LLC, the money that flowed toward the drain. With that many corroborating accounts, and with the paper trail I'd assembled, the district attorney's office in Sabrina's original state, the one that had let her slip away 3 years earlier, reopened its file. She was, last I heard, facing charges for the earlier fraud, with more likely to follow. The lifestyle consultant business folded. The curated social media went dark. Whatever new family she'd been circling next, they got to keep their savings, and they never even knew how close they'd come. As for my money, Marcus was right that the documents made it a case rather than an argument. Faced with my grandmother's signed record, the account statements, and a lawyer prepared to file, my father did the only thing left to him. He returned it, every dollar. It took selling some things he didn't want to sell and borrowing against a house he'd hoped to leave clear, but $60,000 went back into an account with only my name on it. Marcus made sure of the titling this time. There is no signer but me. I enrolled full-time that fall. I made the deadline a different one, a later one, but I made it. I'll finish next spring. The harder repair was Nathan. He came to my apartment a few weeks after the confrontation. He stood in my tiny doorway looking around at the 400 square feet, the bed folded into the wall, the hot plate, the folding table where I'd built the case that saved us both. And I watched him understand, maybe for the first time in his life, the exact size of the difference between what he'd been given and what I'd been left. "I never asked where it came from," he said quietly. "Any of it, the car, the condo, the wedding, I just took it. And it was always coming from you, wasn't it, my whole life?" I didn't rush to comfort him. I'm done being the one who makes everyone else feel better about what they took, but I didn't twist the knife either. "Some of it," I said. "Yeah." "I'm sorry, Emily." His voice broke on my name. I know that's not enough. But I'm going to spend a long time being sorry, and I'd like to spend it in your life if you'll let me, not as the brother who takes. I don't know how to be the other kind yet, but I want to learn. It wasn't a tearful, sweeping reunion. We didn't fall into each other's arms. We sat on my folded-out bed and drank cheap coffee out of mismatched mugs and talked, carefully, like two people learning a language neither of them grew up speaking. That felt more honest than a hug. Forgiveness, I've decided, isn't a moment. It's a direction. We started walking in it. My parents I see less. My mother called eventually to say she hoped we could all move past this. I told her I hoped so too, and I meant it, but I also told her that the version of me who moved past things by swallowing them was gone, and she'd have to get to know the new one, who says what she means. She's still deciding whether she wants to. That's her choice. I've made mine. On the folding table in my apartment, next to my textbooks, sits my grandmother's walnut box. I keep the passbook in it still, and both her notes, though the money is safe elsewhere now. Sometimes at night, I lift the lid just to run my thumb over the flowers she carved by hand, and I think about what she told me at her kitchen table when I was 7, that some doors you don't get a second chance at, and that this was hers to me. She was wrong about one thing, though, and I think she'd be glad to be wrong. It turned out the door didn't stay closed. It just needed someone strong enough to open it. And it turned out I'd been strong enough all along. I'd just been spending it on everyone else.